They mocked me for being poor while I cared for our dying grandmother. Then the will was read, and $45 million erased their smiles. This is family drama fueled by family betrayal, one of those revenge stories where justice is quiet, final, and legally airtight. For years, they called me the family disappointment, blind to the fact that I was the only one caring for our dying grandmother while they chased their own selfish lives. But when the lawyer finally read her will, their mocking laughter died instantly as they realized the massive fortune they felt entitled to was never going to be theirs. My name is Scarlett Walker, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the invisible child. In the Walker family, your worth was determined by two things: your job title and your bank account. If you didn't have a six-figure salary or a prestigious degree to brag about at the country club, you simply didn't matter. My brother, Mark, was the golden boy. He worked in high finance, drove a luxury car that cost more than my college tuition, and treated everyone around him like waitstaff. My sister, Jessica, was the princess. She had married into old money, or at least money that was old enough to make her feel superior, and spent her days curating a flawless life on social media. Then there was me. I was an art teacher at a local community center. I lived in a small, rent-controlled apartment, drove a beat-up Honda, and wore clothes that didn't have designer logos plastered all over them. To my parents, Richard and Diane, I was a mistake they couldn't quite erase. They would introduce Mark as our son, the financier, and Jessica as our daughter who is married to the CEO of TechCore. When they got to me, it was usually just, "And this is Scarlett," followed by a quick change of subject. I learned to live with it. I learned to sit at the end of the table during Thanksgiving dinners, picking at my food while they discussed stock options and summer homes in the Hamptons. I learned to tune out the passive-aggressive comments about when I was going to get a real career. I thought I had made peace with my role as the black sheep, but everything changed 3 years ago when my grandmother Eleanor fell ill. Grandma Eleanor was the matriarch of the family. She was my father's mother, a woman of sharp wit and, unbeknownst to most, immense private resources. She lived in a sprawling, historic estate on the edge of town called Rosewood Manor. Growing up, it was the only place I ever felt safe. While my parents were busy grooming Mark and Jessica for greatness, Grandma would sit with me in her garden, teaching me the names of flowers and letting me paint on her porch for hours. When she was diagnosed with advanced dementia and congestive heart failure, the facade of the loving Walker family crumbled instantly. I remember the family meeting vividly. It was held in my parents' pristine living room, where coasters were mandatory and voices were never raised unless the maid missed a spot. My father, Richard, swirled his scotch and looked at the floor. "It's going to be a lot of work," he said. "We have to be realistic. The doctors say she needs 24-hour care." My mother, Diane, didn't even look up from her phone. "Well, obviously we can't have her at Rosewood anymore. It's too big, and frankly, it's a liability. We should sell the estate. The market is hot right now. We can put her in that facility, Shady Oaks." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Shady Oaks was a budget nursing home known for being understaffed. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. "She hates hospitals," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "She made me promise years ago that she would die in her own home. You can't sell Rosewood." Mark scoffed from the armchair. "Be realistic, Scarlett. Who is going to pay for private nurses? That estate is a money pit. Selling it covers her care and protects the inheritance." There it was, the truth. They weren't worried about Grandma's comfort. They were worried about their inheritance being eaten up by medical bills. They saw Rosewood Manor not as a home, but as a pile of cash they were waiting to cash out. I looked at them. My father, my mother, my siblings, they were all well off. They could easily chip in to hire a private nurse, but they wouldn't. It would cut into their vacations, their car leases, their image. "I'll do it," I said. The room went silent. Jessica let out a high-pitched, incredulous laugh. "You? You work full-time, Scarlett. You can barely take care of yourself. I'll quit my job at the center, I said, my voice gaining strength. I'll move into Rosewood. I'll take care of her. I can do freelance commissions from home to pay for her groceries. You won't have to pay a dime for her care. Just don't sell the house yet. Let her stay home. My father looked at my mother, calculating. If I did this, the burden was removed. They wouldn't have to visit the nursing home, they wouldn't have to pay for facility fees, and best of all, they could keep the estate as an asset until she passed. Fine, my father said, waving his hand dismissively. If you want to throw your life away to be a nursemaid, go ahead, but don't expect us to fund your little sabbatical. You cover your own expenses. And just like that, I ceased to be a daughter or a sister. I became the help. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life. Moving into Rosewood wasn't a fairy tale. The house was old and drafty, the plumbing was finicky, and Grandma's decline was brutal. There were nights I didn't sleep, terrified that her breathing would stop. There were days she didn't recognize me, screaming that a stranger was in her house, throwing soup bowls at the wall. I learned how to change adult diapers. I learned how to crush pills into applesauce. I learned how to lift a human body dead weight to get her into the bath. It was exhausting, unglamorous, back-breaking work. My hands became dry and cracked from constant washing. My social life evaporated. My friends stopped calling because I could never go out. But there were beautiful moments too, moments of clarity, where Grandma would look at me with those piercing blue eyes and squeeze my hand. She would tell me stories about her youth, about the war, about the grandfather I never met. "Scarlett," she whispered one night, her voice raspy, "why are you the only one here?" I smoothed her hair back, my heart aching. "They're busy, Grandma. You know how important their jobs are." She frowned. "Busy. Yes, busy waiting for me to die." I tried to hush her, to tell her that wasn't true, but we both knew it was. In 3 years, my parents visited 4 times. 4 times, and each visit lasted less than 30 minutes. They would stand in the doorway checking their watches, refusing to sit down because they didn't want to get germs. They would ask me about the roof or the boiler, checking on the condition of the asset. They rarely asked how she was feeling. Mark and Jessica were even worse. They came exactly once, on her 90th birthday, and only because they wanted to take a picture for social media. I remember that day vividly. Jessica swept in wearing a white dress, holding a bouquet of flowers she had bought at a gas station 5 minutes prior. She posed next to Grandma's wheelchair, forcing a smile onto her face while Grandma looked confused and frail. Click, posted. "Happy 90th to the matriarch of our family. So blessed to spend the day with her. Hashtag family first, love." As soon as the photo was taken, Jessica dropped the smile. "God, it smells like medicine in here, Scarlett. Can't you open a window?" "She's cold, Jessica," I snapped. "She has poor circulation." "Whatever," Jessica sighed. "Look, Mark and I are going to brunch. We just wanted to drop by. Make sure you don't let the gardener overcharge you, okay? Mom says you're too soft with the staff." They left 10 minutes later. They didn't even bring her a card. Grandma looked at the door they had just exited, her eyes welling up. "They are wolves, Scarlett," she whispered, "dressed in silk, but wolves all the same." I hugged her tight. "I'm here, Grandma. I'm not going anywhere." She gripped my arm with surprising strength. "I know you are, my dear, and I see everything. Never forget that. I see everything." I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought she was just being sentimental. I didn't know she was making plans. When Grandma Eleanor finally passed away, it was a rainy Tuesday morning. I was holding her hand. It was peaceful, just the two of us, exactly as it had been for 3 years. I called my parents. My father answered on the 3rd ring. "She's gone," I said, choking back tears. There was a pause. "Okay," he said, his tone businesslike. "Call the funeral home, we'll handle the obituary. And Scarlett, make sure the house is clean. People will be coming over for the wake." No, are you okay? No, we're coming over. Just instructions on how to prep the venue. The funeral was a theater production. My mother wore a vintage Chanel black dress and wept dramatically into a lace handkerchief for the benefit of the other country club wives. Mark gave a eulogy about Grandma's spirit of generosity, a woman he hadn't spoken to properly in a decade. Jessica live-streamed the procession. I sat in the front row, numb, wearing my simple black dress, exhausted down to my bones. I hadn't slept in 48 hours. I had been the one to dress her body. I had been the one to choose the casket. Yet, at the reception afterwards, I was treated like an invisible guest. Family friends walked right past me to offer condolences to Mark. "It must be so hard," they said to him. "You were her favorite grandson." Mark nodded solemnly. "It's devastating, but we have to be strong." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table of catered shrimp and champagne, but I stayed silent. I told myself it was over. I had done my duty. I had loved her. That was enough. A week later, we were summoned for the reading of the will. It was held at the offices of Henderson and Associates, the oldest law firm in the city. Mr. Henderson had been Grandma's lawyer for 40 years. He was a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that gave nothing away. We gathered in the conference room. My parents sat at the head of the table, looking confident. Mark was checking his stocks on his phone. Jessica was complaining about the air conditioning. I sat in the corner, feeling small. My father leaned over to my mother. "Once we get the deed to the house, we should list it immediately. I already have a developer interested in the land." My mother nodded. "And the jewelry. I want to appraise the diamonds before Jessica takes what she wants." They had already divided her life up. They had already spent the money in their heads. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. The room went silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice gravelly. Mrs. Walker was a very meticulous woman. Over the last 3 years, she made several amendments to her last will and testament. What I am about to read is her final version, executed 3 months prior to her passing, while she was of sound mind and body. I personally oversaw the signing. My father frowned. "Amendments? What amendments? She didn't tell us about any changes." "She was a private woman," Mr. Henderson said simply. He put on his glasses and cracked the seal on the envelope. He began reading the standard legal jargon, and the tension in the room grew thick. "To my son, Richard Walker, and his wife, Diane." My parents sat up straighter. "Here it comes, the bulk of the estate. I leave the antique vanity mirror from the master bedroom. It is my hope that you will look into it and perhaps one day see yourselves as clearly as I saw you in my final years." The room went dead silent. My mother's mouth dropped open. "Is that a joke?" she sputtered. "A mirror?" Mr. Henderson continued, ignoring her. "To my grandson, Mark Walker." Mark smirked. Surely the investments were coming to him. "I leave the sum of $1. This is to ensure that you cannot contest this will by claiming you were forgotten. You were not forgotten, Mark. You were simply observed. I leave you this $1 so you may invest it with the same care you invested in our relationship." Mark's face turned a violent shade of red. He stood up. "This is insane. She was senile." "Sit down, Mr. Walker," Mr. Henderson barked. "I am not finished. To my granddaughter, Jessica Walker." Jessica looked terrified now. "I leave my collection of vintage etiquette books. It is my dying wish that you read them and learn that class is not something you buy and love is not something you post for likes." Jessica gasped, tears of rage springing to her eyes. "This is humiliating." Mr. Henderson took a deep breath and turned his gaze toward me. His expression softened for the first time. "And finally, to my granddaughter, Scarlett Walker." My heart hammered against my ribs. I expected nothing, maybe a painting or a few trinkets. I didn't care. I just wanted to leave this room and get away from my family's toxicity. To Scarlett, the only one who stayed, the only one who held my hand when I was afraid, the only one who sacrificed her freedom to give me dignity. Mr. Henderson paused, looking at the paper, then back at me. I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes Rosewood Manor and all its contents. It includes my investment portfolio, my offshore holdings, and the rights to my family trust. The silence that followed was deafening. It was heavier than the air in a tomb. My father was the first to speak. His voice was a low growl. What is the value of the remaining estate? Mr. Henderson checked a separate document. Including the property, the stocks, and the bonds accumulated over 50 years of compound interest, approximately $45 million. Chaos erupted. $45 million? My mother shrieked. That's impossible. She lived like a pauper. She lived modestly, Mr. Henderson corrected. There is a difference. Mark slammed his fist on the table. You manipulated her. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You spent 3 years whispering poison in her ear. You turned her against us. This is undue influence. I'll sue you. I'll sue you for everything you have. Mr. Henderson raised a hand. I anticipated this reaction, as did Mrs. Walker, which is why she recorded a video statement on the day she signed this will. Would you like to view it? My father looked like he was having a stroke. Play it, he hissed. Mr. Henderson pressed a button on the wall, and a large screen descended. The projector hummed to life. And there she was, Grandma Eleanor, sitting in her favorite armchair in the library of Rosewood Manor. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp. Hello, Richard, Diane, Mark, Jessica. Her voice filled the room, and a chill went down my spine. It was like she was in the room with us. If you are watching this, you are angry. You are likely accusing Scarlett of tricking me. Let me be perfectly clear. Scarlett never asked for a penny. In fact, she tried to refuse the stipend I offered her for groceries. She is the only reason I lived my final years in comfort. She leaned into the camera. I waited for you. For 3 years, I waited. I checked the driveway for your cars. I checked the phone for your calls. I gave you every opportunity to be a family. You chose your money. You chose your pride. So now I am choosing Scarlett. She paused, and her expression turned steely. To contest this will is to admit publicly that you abandoned your dying mother. Mr. Henderson has logs of every visit, every phone call, or lack thereof. If you sue Scarlett, he has instructions to release those logs to the press. Do you really want your friends at the country club to know exactly how often you visited me? The screen went black. The room was silent again, but this time the energy had shifted. The rage was replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. My family cared about nothing more than their reputation. The threat of public exposure was a checkmate. My father slumped in his chair. He looked old, defeated. Mr. Henderson handed me a thick folder. Miss Walker, everything is in order. The keys to the estate are yours. The accounts have been transferred. You are a very wealthy woman. I took the folder, my hands trembling. I didn't look at my family. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the door. Scarlett, wait! It was my mother. Her voice had changed. It was no longer shrill. It was sickeningly sweet. Scarlett, honey, let's not be hasty. We're family. We can work this out. $45 million it's a lot of responsibility for a young woman. Your father and Mark, they know finance. They can help you manage it. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I turned slowly to look at them. They looked like hungry dogs, desperate, pathetic. And then I realized something I hadn't seen before. The designer suits, the cars, the talk of investments, it was all a shell. They needed this money. They had been counting on it. How much debt are you in, Mark? I asked quietly. Mark went pale. What? You heard me. You're desperate. You've been leasing a life you can't afford, waiting for Grandma to die so you could pay off your credit cards. Am I right? Mark looked down at the table. And you, Dad? I looked at my father. The market has been rough lately. Is the house even paid off? He didn't answer. I tightened my grip on the folder. I don't need your help managing my money, and I don't need a family that only loves me when I have something they want. But Scarlett, Jessica whined, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, tears of loss. We're siblings. You can't just cut us out. I have the baby on the way. We were gonna buy a bigger house." I remembered Jessica complaining about the smell of Grandma's medicine. I remembered her checking her watch at the funeral. "You have the etiquette books, Jessica," I said, cold as ice. "I suggest you start reading." I walked out of the office and didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The news spread through our small town like wildfire. The disappointment was now the heiress. Suddenly, people who hadn't spoken to me since high school were sliding into my DMs. My phone rang nonstop. My family tried everything. They sent flowers, they sent long, emotional letters apologizing for past misunderstandings. Mark showed up at my apartment door drunk, begging for a loan to cover a gambling debt he'd been hiding. I didn't open the door. I hired security for Rosewood Manor and had them escorted off the property if they came near. I didn't keep all the money for myself. That kind of wealth rots you if you're not careful. I'd seen it happen to them. I set up a foundation in Grandma's name dedicated to elderly care, funding home nursing for low-income families so no one else would have to die alone in a facility like Shady Oaks. I renovated Rosewood Manor, restoring it to its former glory. I turned the old carriage house into a sprawling art studio where I now teach free classes to underprivileged kids. As for my family, the fallout was swift. Without the inheritance bailout they were banking on, their house of cards collapsed. My parents had to downsize, selling their mansion and moving into a condo that my mother constantly complains about. Mark filed for bankruptcy and lost his high-flying job. He now works in sales at a mid-tier firm, driving a used sedan. Jessica's husband left her when the money dried up. It turns out he was just as shallow as she was. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the back porch of Rosewood Manor, looking out at the garden where Grandma and I used to sit. The air smells of jasmine and rain. I remember the years I spent wiping her brow, the years I spent being invisible, the years they called me a failure. They thought I was wasting my time. They thought love was a poor investment. But as I sit here, drinking tea from Grandma's favorite china, looking out over the empire that is now mine, I know the truth. They invested in appearances. I invested in a person. And in the end, I got exactly what I deserved. And so did they.